Hey guys, it's Danny. Today I'm gonna tackle the Mini Phalaenopsis orchids that I recently purchased. Look at them, they're just so pretty. However, I want to repot them, put them in the setup that they will be in my environment because they will just start to take to it faster. And yes, I will be repotting them in bloom and we're gonna address that, of course. And if you watched my whole video with them, I have a sickly one in the back there which doesn't appear to have too many roots. So we're just gonna have to see how she looks like, what we find in the pot, and I will repot one of them on camera with you guys and the other ones off camera. I'm gonna talk about the setup that I'm gonna use. So that said, let's get to work. So this is the orchid we're gonna work with. This is a double orchid. She actually has a basal keiki. I always go for Phalaenopsis orchids, no matter if they're minis or mature, that have basal keikis because I like to keep them attached. They will eventually create their own root system and will not drain the energy of the mother plant. However, they will both bloom once the keiki reaches maturity, of course. So the bloom show will be even better. What I don't like to keep are the spike keikis. And in the hobby there is the Phalaenopsis equestris, which is known to be a massive keiki producer. And if you look for it on Google, you will see pictures with a lot of keikis on the flower spikes. I don't like that look personally, but I have seen some individuals with a lot of spike keikis looking pretty impressive as well. So it's a preference thing. But typically I don't like to remove the basal keikis because it just makes the plant look bushier overall and I get more flowers. Now, talking about the repotting while the orchid is in spike or in bloom, typically it's best to be avoided because it can actually affect the bloom. Yes, it can make the spike abort the buds or even the flowers, depending on the orchid, depending how stressed it is and how much you are going to damage the root system. There are orchids which are not all that prone to having issues with their flowers, such as the Phalaenopsis. There's another more important aspect. If you stress the orchid enough with repotting and you let the flowers be, which stress the orchid even more by draining energy, you can actually put the life of the orchid in danger, which is worse than actually losing the flowers. So there are some considerants here. But as I was saying, there are orchids which are not as prone to having bad reactions to repotting, and also there are media which don't typically damage the root system all that much. And one of these media is sphagnum moss. I personally love sphagnum moss. It's just so easy to detach it from the roots of Phalaenopsis. It can get a little bit tricky with other orchids, but Phalaenopsis, in my opinion, are really easy to work with. So we have two things going for us here. We have a Phalaenopsis, which is a robust plant. It also has robust, thick roots, which are less prone to breakage, and we also have sphagnum moss. We do have quite a lot of things going for us, but of course, I will keep an eye on this orchid if I see she is struggling, meaning I will see the leaves going wrinkly and limpy. Definitely, I will cut the flower spike. I personally don't like to jeopardize the orchid in favor of the flowers because I can always make it rebloom if I tend for it properly. For now though, I will let the flower spike be. Most probably I'll see how the roots look like, but that was just a little bit of an introduction to why I choose to do the things I do. There are certain instances where I really don't repot, instances where I repot straight away and just cut the flower spike just to be certain. Sometimes the media here is just so bad or infested with snails or other pests that I need to repot the orchid sooner rather than later. And because I know the orchid will be affected by the repotting, I just go ahead and cut the flower spike and be patient until the next blooming. I don't think it will be the case with this one, but we shall see. Now, first things first, when we work with sphagnum moss, to remove it, first we need to wet it. This is not like bark or other media which can be removed at least partially if it's dry. Sphagnum moss is a pain to remove dry. It becomes very brittle and pretty harmful to the roots actually. So to make it soft again, it's a good idea to wet it, and I will go ahead and do that at the sink. And we're back. The medium is moist, so just like with other unpottings, I will first squeeze a little bit on the pot just to make sure the roots get removed from the sides, if I have any, although this orchid is a little stressed. Let's remove the tag. Then I will grab the orchid somewhere close to the base, and I will just pull up. And here we have it. As I was expecting, not too many roots in comparison to the other orchids, but we do have this root, which is nice. Ooh, the smell right now, you guys. So the smell of the medium is actually very chemically. This is how I would describe it. It's a sign that it's breaking down or that it has decomposing organic material inside. I've seen the other orchids have moss which is in good condition, so there are two possibilities. Either I have some dead roots inside this medium that are decomposing, either dead algae, and as their life cycle continues, some of them die off, and when they do so, they can smell really bad. Also, cyanobacteria smells really bad. I don't know if I have any here, but in any case, that was not a proper medium for the roots of this orchid, and it's not about moss not being suited for Phalaenopsis. It's about an environment thing, the watering technique, and so on. This orchid was really suffering in that medium, and it's a good idea we got her out of there. So I will throw away all of this medium. I will not reuse any of it, and I will clean as much of the medium from the root system as possible. So what I did is I threw away all of the old medium, and I will be keeping the pot. You can actually reuse these pots. If you want to reuse them with the same orchid, if it fits, then go ahead and do so. You can actually reuse them with other orchids. They're perfectly good. All you need to do is make sure you wash them properly. What I like to do is use some bathroom detergent or disinfectant, as it is a little bit stronger, and wash it really well. And it's usually ready to go. Pathogens are easily removable from plastic and things that don't have pores or don't have more complex structures. Also at the sink, I did wash the roots of my orchid and removed all of the bits and pieces of the sphagnum moss. And I would like to mention that my tap water is pretty okay to do this. It's not incredibly hard. It also doesn't have any other types of additives, apart from chlorine, of course, and it can totally be used to rinse the root system of orchids, which are not known to be sensitive to higher amounts of salts. Alrighty, so my preferred medium with Phalaenopsis generally, be them mini phals or the big ones, the complex hybrids, is self-watering with LECA. I will be using my DIY self-watering pots here. These are purchased individually. This is a pretty cheap type of pot that you can find at any garden center or flower shop. We don't need super quality with this. It's more important to have a better quality mask, and this is quite a good brand. This was again purchased from my local garden center, and what is important is that the pot that the orchid will sit in does not fall inside. And this is not a super perfect fit, but it will do. I just needed to stay on top, on the top rim, and leave space on the bottom of the mask for the water reservoir. And I will also be using a wick. This came from a mop. This is microfiber. It is not a natural thread because that will just decompose in the water. This is synthetic, so it will not decompose. And as I was saying, my medium of choice is LECA, and it's actually these clay marbles that you might have seen in flower shops or garden centers. They're pretty popular nowadays. They're heavily used in hydroponics. They work with orchids as well. Actually, a big part, if not most of my orchids are actually potted in this. There are a few orchids which don't really like the properties of this LECA. If you've never heard about LECA, I'll link you down below to a video explaining more and talking about the setups. But with the phals, I've discovered that LECA works great in my environment and with my care possibilities. So all of my phals are actually potted in LECA, including the mini phals. So first and foremost, I will add the wick to the pot from one drainage hole, cross the bottom of the pot, exiting another drainage hole. This ensures that I have quite a lot of the wick inside the pot. I don't just need a little bit of it. And even if it's only at the bottom, I find that in my environment it's pretty much enough. Then I will just place the pot inside the mask and then just go ahead and place medium in the pot just like I would with any other type of orchid medium. And because this orchid didn't really have roots and the flower spike is slightly heavy, she's a little wobbly, I will just reuse the stake it came with. I gave it a wash prior to this. I'm just going to use it for the sake of stabilizing the orchid more than anything else. I'm also reusing one of the clams it had. And there we have it. My orchid is all potted up. The next thing that I want to do is actually soak it. I have my LECA in water. This actually helps with the removal of residual salts that some brands of LECA might have within their structure. So whatever salts the LECA might have on it right now, I want to remove them. You can also flush the pot at the sink. I prefer to just soak the pot. And I think this is about it. I'm not going to let the orchid sit in this water or anything because the LECA is super wet. I just want to rinse pretty much the LECA. And I think that's about it, and being that this orchid didn't really have all that many roots, I think I will just unpot another one on camera with you guys just to show you how the moss gets removed. This one was pretty easy, I just plugged the orchid out, but this is a special case. As you can see, I'm not actually going through the trouble of making an ICU, promoting the roots. Phalaenopsis, for me at least, are not that type of orchids. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll add a link in the description to a video that I made recently about how I help orchids or assist them in growing roots and bouncing back. There are orchids which are a lot more sensitive than Phalaenopsis orchids. With phals, I rarely actually go out of my way to make this setup for them. Maybe my environment helps as well. If you do have issues with Phalaenopsis and promoting roots, the setup in that video might help you out as well. I personally never use sphagnum moss and stuff of the sorts with Phalaenopsis orchids. They typically for me root right away. Okay, so I'm going to dump this water and come back with the osmosis water. Okay, so my water of choice is osmosis water. I have a system. Again, I'll link it down below to the video presentation of my system. The tap water that I have, how do I do this so you can see? The tap water that I have is not very hard, but it's hard enough that in time it will create salt deposits on the medium, and it's just not going to be okay for the roots. I would need to flush way more often than I already do. Some of my orchids are very sensitive to salts, so I just preferred to install the osmosis system and just not have headaches. So what I did right now is just put osmosis water just to fill the reservoir a little, and I will show you how that looks like. There you go. So that's the whole point of the self-watering pot, having a reservoir of water which is not the actual pot of the orchid. We're not sitting the orchid in water or suffocating the roots or anything of the sorts. The water is below the medium, but it always has contact with the medium through that wick, not directly. And this usually keeps my orchid watered for a few weeks in my environment, and Phalaenopsis work really great with this. Now let me show you a few mini phals that have been growing for the past year like this, and I do want to touch base on the lechuza pots a little bit as well. Okay, here we are. I actually started with this self-watering technique in lechuza pots, which are designed self-watering pots, and I've had really good results with my mini Phalaenopsis. The problem with these pots is that, well, they're a little bit expensive, and these particular ones are the older generation. I found them at a discount locally, that's why I bought them. They have such a big reservoir. I never actually get to experience the reservoir just desiccating. It's not gonna happen. After a month, it's gonna be half full. So I don't need that big of a reservoir. I can go with smaller lechuza pots, maybe something like this. But the thing is, when you go smaller with the reservoir, you go smaller with the pot itself as well. And this is a little bit too small. It's actually smaller than that one. And for mini phals, which do have the tendency to create a lot of roots, it is slightly too small and a lot more expensive, this tiny one, than those ones. These pots I really like. I have other types of orchids that I'm experimenting with in this setup, and the gauge makes a difference. And don't mind that, it's a fungus gnat. So that's why I choose to DIY the pots for the mini phals. The downside is there's no gauge. You can of course DIY a gauge, maybe from a straw. I actually received some videos from a viewer who DIY'd some straws into the gauge. You know, you can absolutely do something like that. I prefer not to. As you might know, this year I had a thing with having everything stylish, elegant, pretty, and I know that I'm not good at DIYs. That's the only reason why I don't DIY too many stuff. I'm not very talented at it. So that's why I went for a DIY self-watering pot rather than a lechuza pot, and for the price it's really not worth it. I prefer these ones. I am gladly paying more for these ones because they have the little gauge here and it looks quite pretty. Those ones, for the amount of phals that I have, not really worth it. That's why I'm just DIYing them. Okay, so let's just go ahead and unpot another orchid because that one didn't really have too many roots. So I already soaked the moss, it's wet, and as you can see, this orchid has a lot more roots than the other one. So as we did with the other one, squeeze the pot, grab the orchid, not from the flower spike, that's important, and just pull up. And hey presto. See, that's why I was saying the moss actually looks pretty good. It's not very decomposed, so that's good. I suspect it's not more than 1 year old. And in the middle, what do we have here? It is the plug, and I suspect this is cocoa peat. But as you can see, removal of moss is really no big deal with these orchids because they have very thick roots. So no need for the tweezers here. With other fine-rooted orchids or even cattleyas, I do use the tweezer because it just saves more roots. With these guys, I really don't need it. And here we have it. I'm gonna go to the sink and run some water to remove whatever bits and pieces we have left, but that is about it. With the Phalaenopsis repotting, I'm gonna go ahead and repot all of these. They will all go into the self-watering setup because they just do very great in my environment. And I hope you've all enjoyed this video, you found it useful. Speaking about moss removal, I do have another video on how I remove more compacted moss. That can be a headache sometimes. So I'll link you down below to that video as well. You're gonna have a whole library of videos in the description. But with that said, you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid related subjects. And if you like YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!